The City of Carthage website proclaims the East Texas town the friendliest spot in the world. With idyllic landscaped streets and a small town feel, the genial description doesn't seem far off. In fact, while strolling through downtown, you'd never guess that more than 15 years ago, a beloved member of the community shot his elderly female companion in the back 4 times before stuffing her lifeless body in a freezer and heading off to play rehearsal.
I took her in there and I just laid her in that freezer. I thought, well, I'll tend to this later.
A well-liked member of the Chamber of Commerce and the First United Methodist Church, Bernie Tiede was described by townsfolk as a perfect gentleman with a generous heart. Tiede confessed to the murder of Marjorie Nugent in August of 1997. The town's residents were shocked. He was sentenced to life in prison that following February, and now Tiede spends time doing crafts and writing letters from the confines of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Telford Unit outside New Boston.
So there's a separate building for them. But really, minimum custody is just like it's kind of like going to church camp, if you will, with a whole bunch of strangers that you really don't want to be there with. But when you realize what everybody's there for, it's okay, because you have to get along with these folks. So I encourage people to, sometimes they'll be a little bit out of line and say things that are not.
The spotlight has again been cast on Bernie's crime, with the release of a movie based on events surrounding the grisly murder. And while he has never denied killing Marge Nugent and sticking her body in the freezer,
say, look, this is really what happened. I mean, I did something horrible, and I regret that every day for the rest of my life. And if they gave me 3,000 years in here, they could never take that away from me. I have to live with this every day of my life. And Margie comes and talks to me all the time at night when I'm asleep, and I'm telling you, I have to live with this for the rest of my life. So he had a job.
but after 15 years in prison, he believes if he had been tried in another location, his sentencing might have been different.
I did, and I have to face up to that. And so I needed to do some time. But like I say, if it had happened in a bigger city where possibly it would just gotten, a much smaller sentence, with much more in line with the rest of the things that happen in here. There are people in here that have created and committed much more heinous crimes than I could even imagine. And they'll be going home very quickly. That's the problem. There's
Panola County District Attorney Danny Buck Davidson prosecuted Bernie during the murder trial. He remembers the community's somewhat incredulous reaction after Bernie's arrest.
I can tell you a little bit about that case from the facts. I prosecuted the case. Let's see. According to 38-year-old Bernie Tiede's confession, he shot 81-year-old Mrs. Marjorie Nugent in the back 4 times with her .22 rifle in her carport in her home. He placed her body in her freezer and went about his merry way, spending her money by being a benefactor.
One thing that still seems to bother Davidson about the time frame following the murder is the way Bernie acted before Marge's body was found.
Bernie had come into the town from Louisiana. He was young. He did what people do in a small town to gain respectability. He got involved in the chamber. He got involved in the church. He was friendly. He was nice, and everybody thought he was a good guy. As far as I know, he only killed 1 person. But how can you do what he did, put them in a freezer and go on as if they wasn't alive? I asked him on the stand, how could he preach in the Methodist church, lead the congregation in the Lord's Prayer, knowing that Miss Nugent was in her own freezer dead at his hands? And he said, well, when I thought about it, it made me feel bad, so I just didn't think about it. That was his answer.
Bernie maintains that Margie Nugent's grip was so tight on his time that he couldn't have a life of his own.
So she was very dependent on me. I tried to go several times to eat with other friends, and she would just rant and rave for hours, and it was really, really bad. She was very possessive of my life, so much of my life for the last few years, and it got worse. It got worse.
Scrappy Holmes defended Bernie during the trial.
Absolutely.
Part of his defense was that Margie's need to
There
control
was-
Bernie caused him to snap.
There's not a malicious bone in his body, I don't believe. I really believe what our expert told us, having examined him and tested him and talked to him, was that it was a matter of disassociation, and I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, so I can't really explain in any detail what that is, but it is a mental situation that allows people to do things absolutely contrary to their own personality and their own bent. And I think that's how this happened, that Bernie was.
He believes the way the crime was carried out shows that Bernie experienced dissociation.
He shot her with a .22. And then in her house, put her in a deep freeze. I can't imagine anybody planning that crime.
And Bernie says after he shot Margie, he just lost it.
And I thought, well, she's, I got to put her up for some time. So I just froze. I just panicked. So I thought, well, I put her in the freezer. Being in the funeral business, you keep a body cool, keep it cold. You usually tend to it later on, and that's what I did. I just took out some food from that little freezer room, just right off the door that goes into the house. People think that she was in the kitchen and all that kind of stuff. It was right there. It's just a little pantry. It's right by the door leading from the garage into the house. It was just no big deal. It was right there. And
Danny Buck believes Bernie's greed got the best of him, and recalls that in his confession, Bernie said he'd thought about killing Margie for some time.
And he even prayed about it, and that he had thought about hitting her over the head with a baseball bat, but he thought that would be too cruel.
Chief Deputy David Jeter investigated the crime. He says because of that greed, Bernie did not deserve leniency in sentencing.
As far as her driving him insane or whatever, come on. All he had to do was just walk away. But he couldn't because he had come to enjoy that lifestyle from all that money. So he's where he needs to be for as long as he needs to be there.
Carlton Schamberger owns the funeral home where Bernie worked. Bernie left the business before he started, but he knew Bernie well. He says that if someone like Bernie could kill, then maybe all of us are capable.
We all know somebody who just, most people you meet, you can't fathom them murdering anybody, and then it was someone and you work that close to and you've known that well. And it really wakes you up,
According to the Texas Department of Corrections website, Bernie is eligible for parole in 2027. Bernie says that although he's adapted to life in prison, he'd like to go home.
And I know I need to do some time. I'm going to ask for a time cut, I hope, one of these days when I've got 15 years under my belt. I'm looking now, I want to go home.
And Scrappy Holmes thinks he could have worked harder at the time to have gotten Bernie a lighter sentence.
Pressed a little harder because it was pretty clear the jury was not sympathetic. And maybe, instead of life, it'd have been something that he could have done 20 years and have a shot at having some life left. Now we just have to see.
Danny Buck doesn't share Scrappy's view and says Bernie never showed any sort of remorse for killing Margie.
Found is the fact that Bernie took the corpse, put it in the freezer, and then he went on as if nothing had happened and really had a big time spending Mrs. Nugent's money, which I kind of think that amounts to blasphemy.
Visitors to Carthage likely won't see any lingering effects of how Miss Nugent's murder impacted the community. But the now more than 15-year-old crime still weighs heavily enough on the major players that it continues to polarize their positions.
He's a decent human being that made a horrendous mistake.
That I guess any of us are capable of that in one manner or form, shape, or another, so.
I'm not a bad person,
He murdered for greed.
I think he would be a danger to elderly women who were financially well off.